Welcome to the Geopolitics and Empire podcast once again. Before we get to our guest, let me just remind listeners to subscribe to all our social media and share our material. Please rate and review our podcast on iTunes and elsewhere. And finally, leave us a donation or tip if you're so inclined via Bitcoin, PayPal, or Patreon to keep us going. Today, we're speaking with Edward Lozansky, who is the founder of the American University in Moscow and the World Russia Forum. He is also a foreign member of the Russian Academy of Social Sciences and professor of world politics at Moscow State and National Research Nuclear Universities. We'll be discussing Ukraine and U.S.-Russia relations. And thank you for joining Geopolitics and Empire, Mr. Lozansky.
My pleasure.
Now, I thought we could start with your latest piece that you wrote for the Washington Times, questioning whether Ukraine is vital to U.S. security. I simply cannot understand anyone. I'm being frank and blunt here. I can't understand anyone, especially the hardliners in the West or the North Atlantic, who continue to promote this narrative that Russia invaded Ukraine, when I believe the evidence is ample that it was a U.S. coup, which, as you said in your article, wouldn't correspond to Western, or in broader terms, Judeo-Christian values. And so, this is not me being pro-Putin. It's being in favor of the objective truth, whether, at the time it favors the U.S. or at the time it favors the Russian position. So, we had the Ukrainian orange U.S. color revolution in 2004, followed by the sequel in 2014. And, I would argue perhaps that Ukraine is not vital to U.S. security from a defense posture. But if the U.S. is preparing for an offensive on Russia, then Ukraine perhaps is vital for U.S. Aggression. So can you tell us a bit, what's happening in Ukraine? Is it vital or not to U.S. Security in your mind?
Okay, I'll try to be short because the subject is really, you can expand it and talk volumes. So I'll try to be short. Also, I want to tell viewers that I was born in Ukraine. I speak fluent Ukrainian. I studied in Ukrainian school. And then later I moved to Moscow to study nuclear physics. But I feel very strongly for Ukraine. A lot of my relatives and friends, my high school mates still live in Kyiv. And actually in the past, I was going to Kyiv quite often for reunion. So for me, it's not abstract. It's not just politics. It's just really my life. So I want to start with the point that I was probably one of the first people to recognize independence of Ukraine when it was still part of the Soviet Union. Of course, it may sound a little strange, but this is what happened. When I was kicked out from Soviet Union for my kind of anti-Soviet, anti-communist activities, I came to the United States, and I was asked at the time, what country you were born? It's the place of your birth. And at that time, Ukraine was still part of the Soviet Union. But nevertheless, I said I was born in Ukraine. I felt that Ukraine, free from communism, could really prosper because it's a rich country. It has great potential, very educated people. Ukraine was one of the most strongest and economically developed republics of the Soviet Union. But the only thing is that when I said in the independence of Ukraine, I didn't mean it that it has to be enemy of Russia, because this will be something counterproductive. Yes, Ukraine and all other 15 republics, when Soviet Union collapsed, I really thought it's a good idea, because when those republics will free, they can move independently. But at the same time, this didn't mean they have to break those ties, which we developed 70 years of existence. So strong economic ties, first of all, of course, but not cultural. With Ukraine, it's even more than that. It's family, religion. So when I was dreaming of Ukraine liberation from Soviet Union, I had in mind that Ukraine will maintain all those ties, but still be an independent state. But what happened in 1991, that the West, and of course the United States first, they wanted to transform Ukraine in anti-Russia state. And this is something that I strongly disagree. I think one of the people who advocated this policy was Zbigniew Brzezinski, because Zbigniew Brzezinski, he's of Polish origin, and the relations between Poland and Russia historically are not very good. So Brzezinski said a very famous statement that if Russia is with Ukraine, then it's empire. If you break Ukraine from Russia, then Russia becomes just regional power, which with no relevance on the international arena. So for Brzezinski, this was geopolitics. For me, it was free Ukraine. It's independent states, prosperous, and still maintaining the friendly economic, family, historical relations with Russia. For Brzezinski, and not only Brzezinski was maybe like a strong voice, but not only one. He was followed by many members of American foreign policy elite who wanted to transform Ukraine into anti-Russia or directly into Russian enemy to weaken Russia geopolitically. And I was strongly against that. So this is, sorry for this long introduction, but this is something shows my personal position that U.S. policy toward Ukraine is really damaging, first of all, to Russia, of course, it was intention, but even more damaging to Ukraine itself. And speaking that Ukraine is somehow vital to U.S. security, you can only say it if you think that you weaken Russia, and through that, you just somehow U.S. will gain geopolitical influence. But in the meantime, Ukraine is suffering, Russia is suffering, two Christian nations are suffering. That's why I mentioned about Judeo-Christian values, because if you now put two Christian countries fighting each other, how does it correspond to the ethics and Judeo-Christian values? For me, this is something that is strange to say the least, but it's actually not true.
And just to add on to that thought, how do most other Ukrainians feel? Are they pulled more to the West? Do they feel like you? How do other Ukrainians feel?
Problem is that Ukraine is a special state because it was formed, and I have a special also article in Washington Times. I can send you the link, and maybe because this history of Ukraine, if someone really has time to study, it's a combination of many huge pieces of land which were attached to small portion, which was in 1642. Ukraine was a very teeny part of what is called Ukraine now. So from 1642 to 1917, when this was Bolshevik Revolution, there were Russian czars who were attaching huge pieces of Russian land to Ukraine, and this was mainly from the north. Then in 1917, after Bolshevik coup, Lenin and Trotsky, they attached huge pieces of Ukraine from south and east. And then in 1939, Joseph Stalin attached what it's called Western Ukraine, took it from Poland and attached it to Ukraine from the West. And finally, in 1954, Khrushchev, the Soviet dictator, he simply attached this Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. It was, 90% Russian-speaking and actually ethnic Russians. So you see, it's a very strange state. It's hardly, I don't know, is any other example that you can say that exists like that. So when you say how Ukrainians feel, it depends what part of land you're talking about. So people, mostly anti-Russian portion of Ukraine is from the West. And one can explain because they were never part of Russia, and Joseph Stalin simply, in a deal with Hitler, he attached those lands. So you can, understand their feelings. But what's going on is that those people are actually becoming like most active on political scene. And although in terms of votes, it's minority, they're small, but they are very active. And some of them were Nazi collaborators during the World War II when Hitler invaded USSR. They felt that they better be on the side with Hitler because before that, Stalin took them over, you see? So that's why it can be justified to some extent that they hated Russia because they felt that Russia occupies them first. And they were trying to see maybe Hitler can help them to be liberated from the Soviet Union. And they collaborated with Hitler. And they did many horrible things. And they killed, of course, Jews and Poles and Russians. Actually, the strong this area of Ukraine is called Galicia. And there's a strong resentment from Poles because Poles, they hate Russia as well, but they also hate those Galicians. So it's very complicated, of course, but depends where you live. So in general, majority, these recent elections showed that overwhelming majority, first of all, want peace. And that's why they elected this guy, Zelensky. It's very strange because Ukraine has pretty anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic mood, usually, I would say majority. But still, the elected Jewish president, it shows that they hated this former President Poroshenko so much, and they wanted peace. So they even decided to elect a Jewish president because he was giving a hope that he can bring peace to this unfortunate land. Unfortunately, we see what's going on now. He's not delivering, but maybe there's still some hope that maybe now on Monday, December 9, in Paris, maybe some kind of a compromise can be found, although frankly, I doubt very much because already the opposition to Zelensky, they already saying that there will be another coup if he gives in, if he gets some compromise with Russia, then he will be simply overthrown as well. So, and mostly it comes from the west of Ukraine because they're most passionate and they, being a minority, they still run the streets and they can do many bad things. So Zelensky is in a very weak situation.
And now there's somebody else who has also become embroiled with Ukrainegate, that being President Trump, and which you've written about in your article. And most recently, I've noticed the constitutional lawyer Jonathan Turley, who recently testified that essentially the Democratic Party's attempt to impeach President Trump is based largely on sentiment and feelings of the Democrats and really lacks any credible evidence of wrongdoing by Trump. And I'm going to say I didn't vote in the previous election, so I did not vote for Trump. So I'm in any particular side. But I recall also a few years ago myself having a discussion at a university with a few professors and students, all of which shared the ideology of the Democratic Party, and I was kind of shocked where they openly stated that they supported the idea of an unconstitutional and forceful removal of President Trump just because they didn't like him. And so in your latest article, you wrote, quote, "As someone who grew up in the Soviet Union, I tend to agree that the Trump impeachment inquiry looks like a Soviet-style event. When I listen to Adam Schiff and company, they indeed remind me of Soviet apparatchiks who knew they were telling lies, contemptuous of the fact that their hearers didn't believe a single word they said. These were the unspoken rules everyone had to accept or else. But for God's sake, we are in America, aren't we?" End quote. So how do you see these charges, these new charges of Ukrainegate? We've previously had the Russiagate, now we have Ukrainegate, and this Trump impeachment spectacle and the current domestic politics in the U.S.?
Well, it's very unfortunate because for me, it's like the old circles. I left Soviet Union because I didn't like what was going on there, and the system. My dream was America as land of freedom and democracy, and everything that I was in many of my friends wanted to live in the country which shares those ideas. But right now, what I see a kind of a repeat in many things which I despised in the Soviet Union. I see now happening in the United States. It's very unfortunate, but media, American media, mainstream media, it's Soviet media 2.0, and Washington Post. I used to call it like not just myself. Pravda on the Potomac. Pravda, that's the main newspaper of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and now Washington Post is Pravda on the Potomac, and New York Times, it's Pravda on the Hudson. But I have to say that sometimes what I read in Washington Post and New York Times, this is maybe even worse than what Pravda was doing. So it's Pravda, in the second or third degree. And this is, for me, who lived in the Soviet Union and left it for freedom, and I see that many things are now resembling USSR. And not just only me saying this. Congressman Steve Scalise, he said it, and in this article, I think Washington Times, on the web page, they posted Steve Scalise with a poster of Soviet Union, hammer and sickle, and saying that, so it's not just my radical view, but it's American congressman who is saying things like that. It's just very unfortunate. And right now, by the way, I am writing article for the next, I'm a regular columnist for Washington Times, with some ideas how we can maybe repair the situation. Maybe if we have some time, you'll be the first to hear this, some of my Christmas wishes. I write them in the form of kind of a, again, it's probably not realistic, but at least it's Christmas wish. And I wrote it with some kind of sense of humor, because I know that all my proposals probably will not be fulfilled, except maybe one. But going back to Judeo-Christian values, and now it looks, this year, it's very interesting, because a Jewish holiday Hanukkah and Christian holiday Christmas happens practically at the same time. So I thought this may be some God's divine message. And since in American politics, Jewish, some call it lobby, Jewish politicians in Congress, in the media, play a very important role. I thought that maybe this joint Judeo-Christian message can help, United States and Russia, because this is something that the main theme is that how we can repair these relations, because it's dangerous. It's not just some kind of a scholarly difference. You're talking about two nuclear superpowers who can simply, if there's military conflict, then the whole civilization, it will be end of it as we know it. So almost in all my articles, I'm trying to find some kind of a message that can stop this madness. And what you should start with is somehow we build trust, because at this point, America doesn't trust Russia, because America claims that Russians meddled in the elections, and Russia doesn't trust America, because America and NATO, they surround Russia with all those bases and all that. So this is extremely dangerous. So I came up with like three points. First, my message is to Mr. Putin, and I appeal to Mr. Putin. Just take a microphone and make a public statement that Russia will not interfere in American elections. not in 2020, not in the future. And he makes this pledge that Russia will not interfere in the American election. Because right now, during those impeachment discussions, there's a repeat that Russia, they already know. Pelosi already knows, and not only Pelosi, by the way, it's the only thing that Republicans and Democrats agree that Russia meddled in previous elections, and Russia is already meddling. Elections haven't started yet, but Russia already meddling in those elections. So please, Mr. Putin, just say that you will not meddle in American elections. This is the first thing. And in the past, Russians were saying that, okay, we'll do that if America also pledges not to interfere in our elections. And America interferes in many elections, including Russian. And actually, I was witness in '96 how America was interfering in Russian elections. But to make story short, I said, don't ask Americans to say the same. Just do it on your own. This is the first thing. You make first move in the chess. It's a geopolitics. It's chess. So you make a first move. But then next move is for Mr. Trump. And Mr. Trump, we know that when he was campaigning, he was talking that NATO is kind of obsolete. And of course, he was attacked for that. And then he had to change his tune and that he's in favor of NATO. The only thing he wants Europeans to pay more. But now, unexpectedly, Macron, French president, he said that NATO is actually the major problem of what's going on. And actually, NATO is brain dead. And maybe we have to, because he didn't see, France doesn't see that Russia is going to attack this country. And actually, most of the NATO members don't believe that Russia is going to attack them. The only countries that claim it are Baltics, Poles, and probably that's it. But they're using this Baltics and Poles simply to get some relevance and maybe get some money, and they're strongly anti-Russian. So this is what they're trying to use this language. So Macron said that NATO, the threat to Europe is terrorism. I agree with that. Actually, I wrote about this in the past, and actually with Jim Jatras, we have an article in Washington Times. Actually, it's the only newspaper which is publishing different opinion from Pravda on the Potomac and Pravda on the Hudson and elsewhere. So the idea is to change NATO from actually started with changing name from NATO to IATO. I mean IATO. So instead of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it will be International Anti-Terrorist Organization. So it only change one letter, first letter, instead of N, then you just put I, and make it International Anti-Terrorist Organization. And we wrote, and Jim and I, but now Macron. So we have a strong kind of comrade in arms for that. And in this case, if you change it, not just with names, of course, but also with deeds, then Ukraine can join, Russia can join, any country, Georgia, Zimbabwe, any country which wants to fight terrorism, they can join this organization, and this really becoming a peacekeeping, group, and then everyone is happy. But this is for Trump to do. So, and he said it at the beginning, that this is what he feels. He said that I'm not president of the whole universe. I'm just president. America first. No, I'm only want to take care of America. But establishment, American establishment, foreign policy establishment, they force him to change his tune. So this is like a second wish. And a third wish, dealing with my home country, Ukraine. that to have a peace in Ukraine, in this area, Donbass, which rebelled after this coup in 2014. People in Donbass, they say that we agree to go back to Ukraine. So we don't want to separate Ukraine, but only two conditions, only two, that we have autonomous status, like a special status, not like a federation like what we enjoy in the United States and in Canada. The reason I mention Canada, because second thing what those people want, they want two state languages, because they're all Russian. Well, most of them, of course, Russians, they want to speak their native language. And in Canada, there are many millions of Ukrainians who escaped during those years. And Ukraine, for Canada, is federation and has two state languages, English and French. So my question is, why Ukrainians who live in Canada, why they accept this federation status and two state languages? Why Ukrainians in Donbass and actually maybe some other parts of Ukraine cannot be, are they like second rate or third rate people? So if Zelensky and he now has majority in his new parliament, would accept that okay, you have special status and we'll have two state languages. That's it. It's peace. So three people have to make no pledge. Putin not to interfere in American elections, Trump to change NATO, and Zelensky to agree with those separatist republics' demands. And then we'll have peace on earth, and then all those Judeo-Christian values, will help us to survive. I end article saying that I don't think that any of those wishes, except maybe for Putin, it's very easy. Maybe Putin will listen to me. I don't know. But then it's mainly like a story for Christmas and Hanukkah, and so that at least people will enjoy it, because sometimes we know that miracles do happen during the Christmas time.
Hopefully we move in that direction. And speaking of two state languages, I mean, I'm here in Kazakhstan, and everyone speaks Russian and Kazakh pretty much. So, I mean, there's other parts of the world where this functions. And I wanted to get briefly your take on NATO. I know you'd like to rename it, as you said, IATO, but until that happens, we have to deal with NATO as it is. And recently they had their summit for the 70th anniversary, I believe, in London. And the Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, stated that Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. And beyond that, they're working to add North Macedonia and Bosnia. Furthermore, Turkey's Erdogan has acquiesced to NATO deployments in Poland and the Baltics. And Sergei Lavrov recently stated that NATO wants to dominate the Euro-Atlantic and the Middle East, implying a renewed surge into Syria and Iraq. As well as they've brought up for the first time the rise of China, where NATO is kind of declaring China a threat for the first time ever, something that they have to deal with. So, first the issue of the expansion now further, and are they inventing a new boogeyman of China to justify their own existence, or is fear of China warranted? So briefly, just what's your take on this new round of NATO expansion?
Well, in short, it's a direct way to World War III, because Putin and any leader after Putin will not allow Ukraine and Georgia join NATO. This is a red line which Russia will not allow to cross. So all people who say that, they pushing the world toward World War III, and this is something that we want to avoid. And talk of World War III is now not just some made by people who not in mainstream politics, like scholars, like me. Senator Nunn, very respected, who was chairman of Armed Services Committee, and he's basically a Democrat. he wrote article, not just one, several, that we are now sleepwalking into nuclear disaster. And he actually said that we need dialogue with Russia. And actually, this call was, he was joined then by former Secretary of Defense Perry, and even Secretary of Energy under Bush administration. And more people agree. Even John Huntsman, former U.S. ambassador to Moscow, who during his term, he was saying some really terrible things. He said that diplomacy, it's 100,000 ton of U.S. missile carriers. No, diplomats are not supposed to, use missile carriers in their conversations. It's up to Pentagon. But then when he left his position, he also called for dialogue. So maybe, something happened to his, some ideas came, maybe he read Sam Nunn article and agreed that we have to do that. This is NATO expansion. It's not just sleepwalking, it's just really walking into a nuclear catastrophe. It's unfortunate, it's sad story, but also what it does is that since they also put China into that, it's more and more kind of a reason for China and Russia to move closer, to form some kind of a alliance. It's already economic alliance. I don't know if they will form military alliance, but if all this NATO divisions and all that, they consider Russia and China as major threats. Those two countries have no option but to merge some kind of alliance to resist this encirclement.
That was one of my other questions. Eurasia, Halford Mackinder, who we talk about often or cite on this program, it was the Anglo-American and Halford Mackinder's kind of nightmare that Eurasia comes together. And that's what's happening, as you mentioned, the dynamics of the Eurasian alliance of China and Russia between the different economic arrangements, as well as the increasing military security arrangements. You've got the Belt and Road, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In fact, it was interesting recently to hear about a joint China-Russia draft plan, I believe, to deal with the Korean Peninsula, which kind of demonstrates a power shift now to the east. Do you feel that Eurasia coming together is earth-shattering in terms of international relations, and the power is shifting east?
Yes, it's of course, this is what's happening. That's why I think Macron, probably one of the first of the Western leaders who understand that. And he feels that what this brain-dead NATO is doing, and of course foreign policy establishment, mainly United States, because US is the leader, and NATO does what Washington wants. So Macron feels that, and he sees danger, and that's why he feels that he didn't call this exactly what I said, IATO, but actually his logic was exactly on that. He said that our enemy is international terrorism. Actually, in one my columns in Washington Times, I suggested that maybe we should think about smaller, since Security Council, UN, is not very effective. And when the United States decided to invade Iraq, didn't ask permission from Security Council because they knew that it would be vetoed, by the way, not only by Russia, but at that time, France was against it, and France also permanent member of UN Security Council. Germany, by the way, was also against that. So George Bush just simply invaded Iraq without UN Security Council. It shows that UN Security Council, it's something that is not fulfilling its duty. So I came up with the idea to maybe have a smaller version of Security Council, and this will have the United States, will have Russia, China, India, and well, it will be good if we have EU, but EU is a mess now, and with Brexit, it's what's going on. So then Macron came, and since now France is a nuclear power, the only nuclear power after Brexit, then it's the only nuclear power in Europe. Then it will be like G5. So in this G5 can really make sure that it manages security issues, and then maybe then world will be safer. So I keep coming with all those crazy ideas, but at least I have a voice in Washington and Moscow, because I'm columnist for two major newspapers, Washington Times and Izvestia. So at least my messages go to Russia and go to to Washington. So at least some people read it. I don't know what effect it has, but at least gives me some satisfaction that I'm not just sitting and waiting for nuclear bomb, hitting both countries. Actually, my latest book, which I just published, is how joint forces of the United States and Russia, they prevent terrorist attack, which they get hold on small called suitcase nuclear bomb, two of them, and they wanted to explode them simultaneously in New York and Moscow. So CIA and Russian FSB, they formed a joint team, and they prevented this terrorist attack. So this is my latest book. By the way, it was translated in Russian without even, I didn't know that they wanted to do it. And now I work trying to see if I'll get some interest from the movie producers who do this movie, which shows that US and Russia can work together, and titles this book Operation Elba. And the reason I called it Operation Elba, because in 1945, on April 25, 1945, joint forces from the United States and at that time Soviet Union, they were moving on Nazi Germany, and they met on the Elbe River in Germany, the city Torgau, and Americans were advancing from the west, Soviets from the east, and they met at this Elbe River, and this was the actually end of World War II. So that's why I called this book Operation Elbe, having in mind that maybe we have to repeat the thing again, but in the fight with terrorists, and looking for now film producers. Russians already have expressed interest, but I feel that this has to be joint production. So we'll see if I'll find American producer who wants to join, and we can make this movie.
And is the book available for purchase? Where can we get
it? Amazon. You go to Amazon, put Edward Lozansky, and it will come up immediately. I can show you this to you.
We'll have to check that out.
Yeah, this is a book. And but it has also Russian edition. The most prestigious Russian publishing company translated it in Russian. So it's now really, I don't think it's bestseller yet, but it's really selling very well.
And I did want to just add to, and I think it's the right thing, as you say, that you're doing, and what I'm trying to do is, if enough of us speak out towards peace, hopefully we get a critical mass, and something moves in that direction. And I kind of do it for my children. It's like, I want my children to say, I tried to find the truth and fight for peace and try to make something happen instead of just sitting around as a spectator. And I wanted to get your thoughts as well. Recently, the Belarus president Lukashenko and President Putin have agreed to what I suppose we can call an EU-style regional integration, where they've agreed to unify the single parliament, followed by common oil, gas, electricity markets, etc. And it kind of seems to be this beginning of creating like an EU model in Eurasia with the Eurasian Union. and so far it's like Belarus and Russia. But this was Nursultan Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan's idea, I suppose, announced in 1994. This idea of a Eurasian Union. So, I mean, what are your thoughts now of this Belarus and Russia kind of coming together? And I'm supposing if the trend continues, Kazakhstan will join.
I think it's a very good idea. But I think from my point of view, instead of having two and maybe like competing structures, they should work together. The problem is that going back to Ukraine, what happened is that Russia wanted Ukraine to, of course, be part of this Eurasian Union, and EU wanted Ukraine to be part of EU, and offered them something called very artificial thing called EU association. So it's not like it's like lady invading, right? So it's not membership, but at least some kind of affiliation. It's like in the university you have professor and then you have associate professor, which is, but in case of Ukraine, it was much less than associate professor. It was just something symbolic. But what was wrong in this thing is that Ukraine could benefit a lot more if it would try to keep at least economic ties with both Russia and EU. And this is what I actually was writing some of my columns, is that taking into account strong ties, religious, family, historical, cultural, between Ukraine and Russia, why EU would insist of breaking its ties in exchange for ties with EU. For Ukrainians, it would be much better to maintain both connections, and that would benefit from both sides. But the EU goal was not to help Ukrainians. This was the last thing on their mind. They wanted to Ukraine and Russia to break their ties. And this is, as a result, we get what we have now, military conflict, like about 13,000 people dead. Ukraine lost Crimea, and this Donbass situation is kind of very shaky. But all, I think it started with this game of splitting. So it's like, it goes back to, Middle Ages and all that, divide and rule. I am more for kind of a union. I am for, working together. So, Belarus and Russia, they have to somehow survive, and that's why they created those Eurasian unions. But ideally, they have to repeat what I say with IATO, International Anti-Terrorist. Now they have to have economic union as well, global economic union, instead of having those blocks which compete with each other. They will benefit if they work together. But at this point, it's probably not too realistic. That's why I think it will be a good idea for Russia and Belarus to do what they can. If the Kazakhstan joins, it's great. We now see not only this, we have many Eurasian groups like Shanghai Cooperation Organizations and this thing, ODKB in English, I don't know, it's a security group, which has also some former Soviet republics. So we have parallel structures now, Eurasian, and this is probably not. I don't think that it's the best scenario. Would be simply if Eurasia and Europe and United States, they're not really trying to compete each other, but working together for benefit of all.
How do you see the Russian economy? Recently, some analysts, I believe on Wall Street, have called the Russia economy bulletproof, that they can pay off their foreign debts with central bank reserves. They're cutting interest rates. Their currency is stable. They're accumulating gold. They're looking for swift alternatives. And recently, President Putin has said also that he believes the US dollar will collapse. So what are your thoughts on, both briefly the Russian and US economy going forward?
Of course, sanctions And the current situation, it hurts Russia. And I know I spend a lot of time in Moscow. I see that people now the income is not as good as it used to be, and they have to cut on their extra kind of curricular activities. It's still not it's not bad, but it's definitely worse than it used to be. The sanctions, they take their toll. There's no doubt about it. But in general, Russian people are used to tough times, and I think they will somehow manage. Of course, if sanctions are lifted, it will be much better. I don't see at this point how this can be done unless really now I believe that Macron is becoming more and more like a Western leader with guts. Trump, he promised many things, and but so far he is not delivering on them. Although American economy is doing well. By the way, just today, new numbers came of jobs, and they're very good, very strong. I think it will help Trump eventually to overcome this crisis with impeachment and win next elections. But on terms of security and extending hand to Russia, he's saying that this is what he promised during his campaign, because he understands that with U.S. security, getting along with Russia is good. He keeps saying it's a good thing, not the bad thing. Well, using Trump vocabulary, but so far he didn't deliver. But with economy, I think American economy is doing quite well, and almost on all parameters. So which is probably good. But Russian economy probably will survive. But again, sanctions, they take their toll.
And looking to the future, post-Trump, post-Putin, recently a Putin aide, I believe, suggested that Putin will not run for office after 2024. Nobody knows. I mean, it's a fun, as they say, dinner guessing game. But let's say Trump finishes his second term in 2024 together with Putin. How do you see America and Russia after that?
Well, I think we need some fresh blood in both countries. I believe actually in America, right now America goes through a crisis, probably a major crisis in American history, and it is not just my words. Many people who watch what's going on in Congress, they think that America never experienced anything like that. So I think that, at least I hope that America will overcome it, and maybe we'll get some new leader. At this point, I don't see, looking at the stage of both Republican and Democratic establishment, and I don't see any name which can really lead the mankind to a prosperous future. And the same thing, Putin is so overwhelming that anyone next to him looks small. So I think that Putin is smart enough to not to run again in 2024. I practically can guarantee it. So we have 5 years or 4 years to see if we see any names which can replace both Trump and Putin, and probably, as a matter of fact, it's interesting that it will be at the same time, right? Putin will end in 24 and Trump. So it's interesting. But a lot will depend on those two countries who will come up as the future leader. At this time, I don't see any names that I can point to that I would vote for.
And is there a threat, do you think, of the U.S. attempting to take control of Russia again, like they did in the 1990s, through a pro-Western faction or fifth column within Russia? Is that something you fear, or Putin has taken care of that?
Well, actually, it's even written in both EU. There's Mogherini. One of her 5 principles how to deal with Russia has one principle: to support Russian opposition. This is it's in EU charter, and the same thing in the US Congress with all the sanctions, all the bills. It also has special line: support Russian opposition openly. I don't know if is it interference, is it meddling? Well, I think so, but I think Putin can handle this, and he still has tremendous popularity, ratings. Of course, when the economy goes down, ratings also, present rating goes down as well. This is normal. But while he's in the office, I think that Russia is pretty safe. Of course, I think there will be pressure when we will come into 24. Then it will be additional pressure, and major resources will be provided by America and EU to somehow support this opposition. But this is, I think, closer to 23, 24. And probably will try to repeat what they did in Ukraine, because we know that billions of dollars were available, invested in Ukraine to steer this anti-Russian campaign and the anti-Russian mood. And they will definitely do that. But so Russia, probably Putin know that, and they'll have to take care of their country.
So you've given us your 3 Christmas wishes. Do you have any final thoughts for us as we leave 2019 behind and enter the new year into 2020? So any additional or final thought to leave us with?
Well, I think I have a project because I'm not a philosopher. I don't think I'm even a scholar. I'm more kind of an activist. So and my background is physics. So I try to be more practical. So next year I have a project, and I want both Americans and Russians to go to this place, city Torgau, Germany, and to celebrate. It will be 75th anniversary of this linkage, meeting on the Elbe River between American and Soviet military. It happened on April 25, 1945. So next year, we want to celebrate the 75th anniversary of this event. And I want to link Washington, Moscow, and the city Torgau. So some people will be, in this place. Some people will celebrate it in Moscow, and some people in Washington, because in all those 3 places there's a monument, Elbe River linkage. There's a one in Washington on actually in Washington there are 2, one on the Arlington Cemetery and one at the World War II Memorial in downtown next to the White House, Lincoln Memorial malls. And then in Moscow, downtown, this famous area called Arbat Street. It's the most fashionable area in Moscow. There's a monument, also Elbe River. So we want people to assemble in Moscow, Washington, and Torgau, and raise their hands and do something that we all, should be together, like our fathers, grandfathers did in 1945. And we'll bring some music and festivities. And also, night before in Berlin, we plan to have a roundtable discussion with scholars from the United States and Russia and some European countries to discuss to come up with ideas. What can we do to save mankind from this nuclear holocaust, which people who push for NATO expansion, they push us into a nuclear catastrophe. So this is my project. So my message is, if you want to join, and you can join it. By the way, when they say linked, of course, we do it like now with Zoom, US, using technology. So all people will see each other.
This is a great project. And yeah, for people who can't be there, I think at least you can think on that day, just think about the events. I know my grandfather, my Croatian grandfather, had been a Nazi prisoner for half a year, survived. And so I think a lot of us have the connection to the events there. And yeah, maybe later you can give us more information as we get closer to the date about the project. And if you want to, again, to hold up your book so people can see it.
Which describes a joint anti-terrorist operation joined by United States and Russia. And they destroyed the terrorist cell which was trying to explode 2 nuclear devices in New York and Moscow.
Okay.
And they're working to make a movie based on this book.
All right. I think I'm gonna get it on Amazon. And you are on Twitter and you write for the Washington Times. Is there anywhere else? And you have the your website. Is there any?
Izvestia. It's a major Russian newspaper. Izvestia in Russian means news. I will send you by email. I'll send you some links because maybe your Kazakhstan students, they speak Russian. They can read both English and Russian.
All right. I encourage listeners to be less emotional and less ideological, I suppose, and more sober-minded and factual when examining such polarizing issues as the ones we have been talking about and discussing. And once again, we thank you for your time, Mr. Edward Lozansky.
Right. My pleasure.